Once, entire afternoons belonged to the street. Children vanished from their homes after lunch and reappeared only when the porch lights flickered on. No schedules, no notifications, no supervision at every step. Just laughter, bicycles, and endless games. So what quietly happened to that world we once called childhood? Hello, I'm Norman Carter, and this is my channel. Welcome, and thank you for being here. There was a time when childhood unfolded largely outdoors, in spaces that belonged not to any single family, but to the quiet rhythm of an entire neighborhood. Many of us remember those years with a kind of gentle clarity. Streets were not merely routes from one place to another. They were gathering places, stages for games that required little equipment and even less planning. On many afternoons, the sound of laughter carried across yards and sidewalks, mingling with the distant hum of a radio or the quiet creak of a screen door opening and closing. In those days, the boundaries of childhood were drawn less by walls and more by familiarity. A child might step outside in the morning and gradually drift through the neighborhood as the hours passed, guided not by schedules but by the simple presence of others doing the same. Sidewalks warmed by the sun became racetracks for bicycles. Empty lots turned into imaginary kingdoms. A patch of pavement could host a game that continued until shadows grew long and the first porch lights flickered on. Many of us remember how naturally these gatherings formed. No invitations were necessary. One child appeared, then another, and before long the quiet street held a small community of its own. The games themselves were rarely complicated. A ball, a chalk line, or sometimes nothing at all was enough to begin. Rules evolved as needed, adjusted through quiet agreement or friendly debate. In that simple process, we learned how to negotiate space, time, and fairness without ever thinking of it as a lesson. Over the years, those everyday moments revealed a rhythm that seemed almost invisible while it was happening. A parent might call from the doorway when the evening approached, their voice traveling easily through the open air. Windows remained open during warmer months, and conversations drifted out onto the street. Somewhere nearby, someone watered a garden or swept a porch, quietly observing the life unfolding outside. What made those afternoons remarkable was not any particular event, but the steady continuity of small interactions. A group of children might spend an hour constructing a makeshift game, only to abandon it moments later in favor of another idea. There was freedom in that movement, a gentle sense that time was generous. The day seemed to stretch comfortably ahead, leaving room for boredom, invention, and discovery. Many of us recall how easily friendships grew under those circumstances. Familiar faces appeared day after day, until the presence of others became part of the landscape itself. Names were learned gradually, sometimes after weeks of shared play. Trust developed not through formal introductions, but through repeated encounters in the ordinary spaces of daily life. Adults observed much of this quietly from a distance. They were present, of course, but rarely intrusive. Their routines formed a calm background to the activities of children. A mother might glance through a window while preparing supper. A father might pause briefly while returning from work, watching a game unfold before continuing inside. These small gestures signaled a quiet awareness that allowed children to move freely while still feeling the steady reassurance of home nearby. In many neighborhoods, the physical environment itself encouraged this kind of life. Houses stood close enough that voices carried easily across fences. Sidewalks connected front doors like a network of informal paths. A short walk could lead to a friend's yard, a corner store, or a shaded tree that had become a familiar meeting point. Looking back now, it becomes clear that these settings offered more than simple amusement. They created opportunities for observation and imitation. Younger children learned by watching older ones. Skills were passed along casually, without instruction. Someone showed how to throw a ball more accurately, how to ride a bicycle without hesitation, or how to settle a disagreement with quiet fairness. None of these moments seemed especially meaningful at the time. They were simply part of how life unfolded. Yet over the years, many of us have come to recognize that these experiences carried quiet lessons about patience, cooperation, and independence. They shaped the way we understood community, long before we ever used that word. Evenings held their own particular charm. As daylight softened, the pace of activity gradually slowed. Games that had once filled the street began to fade. A bicycle leaned against a fence. A ball rested quietly near the curb. One by one, children disappeared into their homes, called inside by familiar voices. Yet the street itself rarely fell completely silent. A porch light glowed here, another there. The distant sound of dishes being washed or a radio program beginning drifted through open windows. In that gentle transition from day to night, the neighborhood seemed to breathe collectively, settling into a shared quiet. For many of us, these rhythms formed the background of childhood, so completely that we hardly noticed them. We assumed they would always exist in the same way, ready to greet the next generation as naturally as they had greeted us. The streets would remain open, the games would continue, and the sound of children's voices would always be part of the evening air. Time, however, has a way of reshaping the landscape of everyday life. Changes arrive slowly, often unnoticed at first. A new routine here, a different habit there, and gradually the familiar patterns begin to shift. Streets remain, houses remain, and yet the atmosphere surrounding them quietly evolves. Today, when many of us walk through neighborhoods that once felt lively with the energy of childhood, the scene often appears more reserved. The sidewalks are still there, the trees still offer their shade, and the quiet beauty of the afternoon light remains unchanged. Yet the sound that once filled these spaces have grown softer, sometimes replaced by a different kind of stillness. This transformation did not occur all at once, nor can be traced to any single cause. Life has simply taken on new forms. Families organize their days differently. Schedules have become more structured. Many activities that once unfolded spontaneously now take place in planned settings, guided by timetables and commitments. Children still play, of course, but often in environments designed specifically for that purpose. Parks, organized sports, and indoor spaces provide safe and welcoming settings where activity continues to flourish. The spirit of play has not disappeared. It has merely found new expressions within the changing patterns of modern life. Technology has also introduced its own quiet influence. Devices that connect us across great distances now occupy a portion of the time that once belonged entirely to the physical world. Conversations travel through screens rather than across fences. Games appear on digital displays rather than on the pavement outside. Yet even within these changes, many of the underlying values remain recognizable. Curiosity continues to guide young minds. Cooperation still emerges whenever people gather with a shared purpose. The desire to explore, to invent, and to connect with others has never truly vanished. For those who remember the earlier rhythms of neighborhood life, these memories often carry a gentle warmth. They remind us of a period when the boundaries of childhood felt wide and open, when an afternoon outdoors could unfold without expectation or hurry. The details may vary from place to place, but the atmosphere of those years remains surprisingly familiar to many. Memory itself plays an interesting role in how we view the past. Certain moments stand out more clearly than others. The sound of footsteps running along the pavement, the quiet satisfaction of mastering a new skill, the feeling of returning home at dusk after a long day spent outdoors. These images remain vivid not because they were extraordinary, but because they were shared by so many. In reflecting upon those experiences, it becomes possible to see them not simply as personal recollections, but as part of a broader cultural inheritance. They represent a way of living that emphasized presence, proximity, and gradual learning through experience. Perhaps the greatest gift of that time was the sense of belonging it created. A child stepping onto the street felt part of a living environment shaped by neighbors, routines, and familiar landmarks. The world seemed both expansive and reassuring at once. Even now, when we encounter a quiet street bathed in late afternoon light, it is not difficult to imagine how easily those earlier scenes might return. A bicycle leaning against a curb, a group of children gathering without invitation, a voice calling from a doorway as evening approaches. These images remind us that childhood, in its many forms, continues to adapt and endure. While the outward expressions of play may change from one generation to the next, the deeper impulses that guide young lives remain remarkably constant. And so, when we look back on those earlier days, the feeling that emerges is not one of loss, but of continuity. The childhood that once unfolded on sidewalks and quiet streets still lives within the memories of those who experienced it. Through those memories, its lessons continue to echo gently across time. carried forward in ways that are sometimes subtle but never entirely absent. In that quiet sense, the laughter that once filled the neighborhood has not truly disappeared. It has simply moved onward, accompanying each new generation as it discovers its own spaces, its own rhythms, and its own ways of growing into the world. When we think back to those earlier years, what often returns first is not a specific event, but an atmosphere. The air itself seemed different, though perhaps it was simply the way we moved through it. Days unfolded with a calm predictability. Mornings began quietly, and by afternoon the neighborhood had awakened into a familiar rhythm of activity. The street was not simply a passage between homes. It was a shared environment where life naturally gathered. Many of us remember how little was required to create an entire afternoon of play. A simple object, a patch of ground, or even an idea was often enough to begin. There was a kind of patience in those days, a willingness to let time stretch and bend as needed. No one hurried to fill every moment. Instead, the day slowly revealed its possibilities. In that environment, children learned to observe carefully. The smallest details held significance. The angle of the sunlight on the pavement might determine the length of a shadow game. A slight breeze could turn a quiet corner of the street into the perfect place for a new activity. These observations were not taught formally. They emerged naturally through repeated experience. Many of us also remember the quiet confidence that developed from this independence. Venturing a few houses away from home felt like an adventure, yet it was an adventure conducted within the reassuring boundaries of familiarity. Every corner had its landmarks. Every yard held memories of previous afternoons. Adults were always present, though often in the background. Their lives followed steady routines that framed the day: a car returning from work, a neighbor tending a garden, the steady sound of someone repairing a fence or sweeping a walkway. These small signals formed a quiet structure around childhood activities. In many ways, these routines provided lessons that were absorbed without deliberate instruction. Children learned the rhythm of responsibility simply by watching unfold. Work was done steadily. Conversations were conducted respectfully, and the small obligations of daily life were handled with quiet consistency. Over time, these observations shaped an understanding of how communities functioned. The street was not owned by any single household. It belonged to everyone who lived along it. Courtesy and cooperation developed naturally because shared space required them. Disagreements occasionally occurred, as they do wherever people gather, yet even these moments carried their own lessons. A game might pause while participants discuss a rule or resolved a misunderstanding. The process was rarely dramatic. Instead, solutions emerged through conversation, compromise, and the quiet desire to continue playing. For many of us, these experiences formed an early understanding of fairness. We discovered that listening to others often brought better outcomes than insisting on our own view. Such lessons were not delivered through lectures. They were learned through repetition, through trial, and through the simple desire to keep the game going. The passage of seasons also left a strong impression on those years. Spring brought longer afternoons and renewed energy to outdoor life. Summer extended the day even further, allowing play to continue well into the evening. Autumn introduced cooler air and new textures beneath our feet as leaves gathered along the sidewalks. Each season carried its own patterns of activity. Certain games belonged naturally to warm days, while others appeared only when the air grew crisp. The environment itself guided these choices, quietly shaping the rhythm of childhood. Winter, too, held its particular charm. The street might grow quieter for a time, yet the sense of community remained. Neighbors greeted one another while clearing paths or pausing briefly to talk near a mailbox or gate. Even brief encounters reinforced the quiet connections that held the neighborhood together. Looking back now, it becomes clear that these experiences provided more than simple entertainment. They offered a form of education that unfolded gradually through lived experience. Children learned how to navigate space, relationships, and responsibility long before such ideas were formally introduced. Many of us carried these lessons into adulthood without ever fully recognizing where they had begun. The ability to cooperate, to adapt to changing circumstances, and to observe the needs of others often traces origins to those early afternoons spent outdoors. As the years passed, however, the landscape surrounding childhood slowly evolved. The changes were rarely dramatic. Instead, they appeared gradually, shaped by broader shifts in society. Streets remained, houses remained, and yet the patterns of daily life began to move in slightly different directions. Families grew busier. Activities became more structured. Opportunities for organized learning and recreation expanded in ways that earlier generations could scarcely have imagined. Children were introduced to new forms of engagement, many of which carried their own valuable experiences. With these developments came a subtle shift in how time was used. Moments that had once been unplanned gradually became part of carefully arranged schedules. The freedom to wander through the afternoon was sometimes replaced by a sequence of organized commitments. Yet, even within these new patterns, the essential qualities of childhood remained. Curiosity, imagination, and the desire to connect with others continued to guide young lives. The setting may have changed, but the spirit of exploration endured. Technology also introduced new dimensions to everyday experience. Tools that once existed only in distant imagination became part of ordinary life. Communication traveled faster and farther than ever before. Information that once required patient searching could now appear instantly. For many families, these changes opened valuable opportunities. Education expanded beyond traditional boundaries. Connections formed across great distances. New forms of creativity emerged through tools that allowed ideas to travel quickly from thought to expression. Still, when many of us reflect quietly on our own early years, the image that often returns is surprisingly simple. It is the sight of a familiar street under a gentle sky, the sound of footsteps running along the pavement, and the sense that the afternoon held more time than we could possibly use. These memories do not ask us to compare one era with another. Instead, they invite us to notice how childhood continues to evolve while preserving its essential spirit. Each generation finds its own spaces for discovery, shaped by the circumstances of its time. What remains constant is the human need for connection, for shared experience, and for the gradual learning that emerges through everyday interaction. Whether in a quiet street, a playground, or a new environment shaped by modern tools, the process of growing up continues to draw from the same deep well of curiosity and imagination. In that sense, the childhood we remember has not entirely vanished. It lives on in the habits, values, and quiet understandings that it helped to form. The lessons learned through simple games and shared afternoons continue to influence how we see the world and how we relate to others. And so, when we pause to consider where street play once lived, the answer is not confined to a particular place or moment in history. It exists within memory, within the rhythms of community life, and within the enduring patterns of childhood itself. Time may reshape the outward form of these experiences, yet their deeper meaning remains. The laughter that once echoed along quiet streets continues to travel forward through the generations, carried gently by those who remember and those who will, in their own way, discover the same spirit of play.